Let me just share a few things about my dad. Give you a little biographical information. My dad was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in 1923. That means that this year, April 22nd of this year, he hit 90 years old. About 20 years ago, he was diagnosed with multiple myeloma. And he's battled that, you know. They've given him chemotherapy and radiation and many medications, and it's really affected his, you know, his feet. His feet swell, and his hands swell to the point where he can't hardly even button his shirt. But you know, he's on some new medication now, and his feet have unswollen, and his hands are unswollen now, and the doctor last time told him that he has the vital signs of a 45-year-old. So that's a good thing. He's, other than not being able to walk very well, he's in good health and in good spirits. And so we praise the Lord for that. Just tell you a little bit about him. He was born in Milwaukee, of course, in 1923. And he graduated from Emmanuel Missionary College, today Andrews University, in 1945. And after graduating, he was called to pastor in the Wisconsin Conference. And he spent 9 years in the Wisconsin Conference, pastoring in different places. I was born there in Baraboo, still the home of Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus. And my sister, Janine, the oldest, was born in Merrill, Wisconsin. I'd just like to say that my sisters are many, but my dad has only one son. I'm his one and only son. I like to remind him about that, you know. So anyway, after pastoring 9 years in the Wisconsin Conference, he was called to the mission field. We were called to go to the country of Colombia. And we spent, in 1954, we spent a period of about 3 months in the city of Medellin, where he studied Spanish with a fantastic Spanish teacher. And then for the next 9 months, he was sent to the coast of Colombia, to the city of Cartagena, where he practiced Spanish. A terrible place to practice Spanish because the Spanish spoken there is terrible. They speak fast and they skip words, and they, you know, it's not a good place to learn Spanish. But you know, he preached there for about 9 months because they had something else planned for him. After spending the 9 months in Cartagena, he was called to serve as the West Venezuela Conference president. Mission, it was a mission at that time, mission president. And so he was there in Venezuela at the West Mission for about, I believe, 3.5 years. Then he was called to be the president of the East Venezuela Conference. There were 2 conferences in Venezuela at that time. And he served, I think, in Caracas for about a period of over 7 years, 7.5 years as conference president. I won't give you all of the rest of the details, but I'll just like to say that my dad has been a church pastor. He has been a Bible teacher on secondary level. He has been a university theology teacher. He was my teacher for about 1.5 years, in fact, in Colombia, besides being my dad. He taught 5 years in the country of Argentina in our theology department there at River Plate University. And he also served as a boys' dean at a school that now is a university in Venezuela. He's actually one of the founders of the university. And so he's been around. He's served in many, many different capacities. He says that the crown jewel of all of the years that he served was beginning the Seventh-day Adventist, what is today the university in Venezuela. And I have a whole story here. I don't know how much of it I should share with you, but a while back I wrote a history of the school. You know, in the course of time, people have a tendency to forget history. And that was the case with him. You know, they celebrated the 25th anniversary of the school, And they didn't even let him know that they were celebrating the 25th. So when they were going to celebrate the 50th, this was last year in July, I decided I would do some research into the original sources. And of course I knew the history, we knew the history, and so I went down there for a week of prayer at the school, and I went to the library, I went into a lot of my dad's files. I discovered a lot of original material about the origins of that school. And so I wrote a little history of the school. It's an amazing story, and it would take me probably about 35 or 40 minutes to go through what I wrote on the history of the school. Many, many miracles. There was no money when the vision came up to establish the school. My dad has always been an outstanding fundraiser, and so he told the brethren down there, we need a boarding school here in Venezuela where kids can be in a city of refuge environment. And they said, well, where are you going to get the money? He said, well, I'm going to canvass some of the great corporations in Venezuela, some of the great nonprofits and government entities, and I'm going to explain to them the Seventh-day Adventist philosophy of education, educating not only the mind, but educating the hand and educating the heart. And, talking about the way that Adventist schools teach young people to have a trade, to work with their hands, to be practical, besides having intellectual knowledge. So he prepared a prospectus with the Adventist philosophy of education, and within a period of about 5 years, he was able to procure over $4 million from the different corporations. And you say, how do you know that? Well, the reason I know is because I went through his file. When we moved him and my mom from Amarillo, Texas to Oklahoma City, we had to clear out the house in like 2 days. And so I had to go through all of his materials, all of his files, and I discovered a sheet of paper that was already yellow. It was old. Of course, it was from back in the early 60s. And my dad has always been a stickler for detail. I mean, he'll tell you dates and hours and places. He'll say, I was in Argentina for 5 years, 3 months, 2 days. I'm surprised he can't tell you the number of hours that he was there too. So he's been very much of a stickler for detail. And so I discovered this yellow sheet, which I donated to the school because they're opening a museum about the history of the school. And he had written down there the names of all of the entities that had donated and how much they donated. And I found many letters from that time that he sent the constituency, which are original letters, already on yellow paper, where it helped me a lot in doing my research. One of these days, if Peter asks me, I'll present this full story of the school. And I'm going to show you some slides. I don't think Steve has hooked up the computer yet, but I'm going to show you some slides of the school the way that it was when they found the land. And then I'm going to show you some slides of the 50th anniversary last year. It's just amazing. He wasn't able to go. My sister Janine is very protective of my dad. The only reason she allowed him to come here is because she and her husband came with him. And they left him here, and then they went off to Hawaii. So I'm daddy sitting. And that's good. I like it. It's wonderful to spend this time with my dad. The only thing is he moves slow, but that slows me down. It teaches me to be patient and to pace myself because I'm always rushing. We will show those slides, and I just want to give him as much time, give you a chance to ask him questions. You already know many of the things that he did during his ministry. He's been retired now. What year did you retire? What year did you retire? May, do you remember the time? Just kidding. He retired in May of 1988 as the senior pastor of the Amarillo, Texas English Church. He served for many years as a pastor in many different places as well. Some real hair-raising stories. One story which is very interesting is, one time he went to this to this region, which is very much in the Tules, in the jungle. And on the same day, he married 22 couples and baptized all of them on the same day. Because they weren't married, they had to marry him first. And I actually have a slide of that. My older sister, you know, she said that she was going to get some slides to me, but she's in the process of transferring them to a CD from slides, and so she wasn't able to get them together. You know, we have some amazing slides there. You're going to see one of them, actually of an alligator, and that this man had in his jewelry shop in one of the cities in Venezuela, a live alligator, long, probably about maybe 10, 12 feet long. And people could come in and actually sit on top of the alligator. You'll see me sitting on top of the alligator. You'll see him sitting on top of it as well. And the owner, he was a little more daring, you know. He would actually, the alligator, you know, he would pet the alligator here under his chin, and the alligator then would open his mouth, and then he would reach in and he would pet his tongue, believe it or not. And, you know, sometimes this alligator would escape into the street, and, you know, he would walk down the street, and, you know, people would come and say, hey, your alligator's out in the street. And so we'd have to go and he'd have to bring it back just like it was a dog. Really amazing. You know, we had the privilege of fishing piranhas. I could tell you stories about that. There's just story after story. I told my dad that he needs to sit down and write a book. He says he doesn't have the energy. So I'm tapping his brain as much as possible and writing things down so that maybe I'll write the book in his place. And, you know, I think that it would be an interesting story to tell. So right now I'm just going to, maybe we can just bring these chairs down here, probably. I don't know if you'll be able to see us. Maybe we better go up here. If you can help my dad, we'll help him. We're gonna go up to the stage platform. You can just this walker that he has, he calls his Ford because he has one of these electric scooters, and he calls that his Cadillac. Okay, well, I don't know if there's a microphone out there, but if there's a microphone, you can ask any questions you want. If not, I'll continue telling you stories. There's all kinds of stories that I could tell you about the times that we spent in Venezuela.
Why don't you let him tell us about your youth?
Yeah. Well, in Venezuela, this young fellow here took all of his primary school in Venezuela. In Venezuela, they don't have 8 grades of primary school, but 6 grades. And since he studied all of his primary school in Spanish, that's why he speaks Spanish so well. Of course, my wife and I, we had to learn to speak Spanish. And we don't speak quite as well, but our 4 children attended at least some time in school in Venezuela, and their studies were in Spanish, and as a result, our children all speak Spanish fluently, just exactly like the Venezuelan people do.
So do you speak Spanish?
Sí, yo hablo el español. Yes, I do speak Spanish. I learned Spanish and I became quite fluent in the Spanish language.
Yeah, Margie?
Did you ever have to discipline Steve?
That question's out of bounds.
Yeah, yes, I think even I had to spank him a few times. But Steve and my children were very obedient children, actually.
So tell us one time what you had to discipline him about.
She wants you to know one example of what is how to discipline.
Oh.
See, they were so far in between. They can't remember.
It's even difficult for me to think of the discipline of Steve. I didn't have to discipline the children very often because they were not disobedient. And actually, I would say this, that in Venezuela, they didn't get into trouble as much as young people do here in the United States. And that's a fact.
He did have to discipline my sisters a lot. You want me to tell you some stories, Alice?
I'd like to hear their side of the story.
Would somebody discipline him, please? Okay, Alice. Oh, my dad wants to say something.
I'd like to tell a little bit about Steve. Actually, at 90 years of age, my mind doesn't work quite as fast as it used to, but this crocodile that this man at the jewelry store had, he took it out of the Apure River, which runs into the Orinoco River, which is the third largest river in South America. And this crocodile was just a baby when he took it out of the river, and it was only about this long, and probably about this far around his body. But when we saw the crocodile for the first time, it was 37 years of age. And at that time, it was about 12 feet long. It was a large crocodile. And if I had known we were going to have this meeting, I would have brought some of those pictures. Possibly Steve here had brought some slides of that, I don't know. But my wife sat on the crocodile and had her picture taken. I sat on the crocodile and had my picture taken. Steve and his sister both sat on the crocodile and had their picture taken. And also our one other daughter of ours did. So we became well acquainted with the crocodile. This gentleman had tamed it, and he invited it one day across the room, and as he called to the crocodile to come, it came across the room, put its head on his knee, and he began to pet it. And then he began to pet it under the crocodile's chin. The crocodile was as tame as any pet dog or any pet cat. You can't believe it, but I hope you have a picture of that.
By the way, he did keep the croc well fed. And we knew that. Alice, Alice and then Norma.
Was there ever a time when Pastor Bohr, the young Pastor Bohr, when he was little, that he preached to some of his pets or to a congregation there?
Well, I can actually answer that question, no. First sermon I ever preached was when I was 19 years old. After graduating from Wisconsin Academy, I graduated in May of '68. My plans were to go to stay with my parents in Venezuela from May until September and go to Andrews University to study physical education because I was pretty good at sports. And that summer, they asked me to preach at the downtown church. Not the school church, but the downtown church. And I'd never preached in my life. In fact, when I was in the academy, I never spoke in public. You know, I was a very shy person, believe it or not. Probably not. But I really was. And so I accepted because they figured that a pastor's son needed to know how to preach because he was a pastor's son. So I wrote out my sermon. I don't even remember what it was about. I wrote out the full sermon and I preached it. And after I preached the sermon, I had maybe 2 or 3 people that came to me and said, "Hey, that was a really good sermon." I thought it was terrible. I read it. They said, "You know, you shouldn't study physical education. You should study to be a preacher." And so instead of going in September to Andrews University, I stayed down there working on the farm, the school farm, until February of the following year when I went to Medellin, Colombia. They began their school year in February. And I enrolled in the first year of theology. And I would have made a mediocre physical education teacher. And I don't think it would have made much of a difference in people's lives. So I've always believed that I made the right choice. Norma?
First of all, what was the crocodile's name and did it ever bite anybody?
What was the crocodile's name and did it ever bite anybody?
I don't know what the crocodile's name was, but the crocodile never bit anyone. No, the crocodile was absolutely tame. It could be petted, it could be set upon, or but how many of you have heard of the piranha fish? Well, Steve wanted to mount piranhas, and we had a medical launch on the Apure River and the Orinoco River, and so Steve would fish for the piranha fish. The moment the bait would hit the water would just bubble up because they would all attack at the same time. Now it was interesting when they wanted to take a herd of cows across the river, they would send one cow across the river, maybe a mile or 2 down the river, and the piranhas would attack that cow while they sent the rest of the cows across the river down here. And within 15 minutes, they had eaten that cow completely, and there was nothing left but bones. But Steve caught quite a few piranha. We didn't call them piranha in Venezuela. We called them caribes.
You know, actually the way that we fished for these piranhas, you know, you can't use nylon, the regular fishing line, because the fish will bite into it, bite it off. So we just get wire and we tie a piece of meat at the end, raw meat at the end of the wire. We throw the wire in, and the water would literally boil, and you would have bunches of piranhas latch onto the flesh, and all we would have to do is yank the wire out of the water, and there would be 6, 7, 8 piranhas latched onto the meat without a hook. They're that, and the interesting thing is, you know, there were kids swimming in the same place that we were fishing for the piranhas, because unless there's an open wound, see, they can smell blood, and if there's not an open wound, you can actually swim in the waters. But if there is an open wound, then you know they can they'll clean you to the bone in 2 minutes. It's an amazing thing. Okay, so let's see, Cosman.
I wanted to invite Pastor Bohr Sr. to give his opinion, to give your opinion, sir, on why you think young people, yours included in Venezuela, got into a lot less trouble. Maybe you can comment on how their time was spent. Did they have activities planned all day outside school? Did they have a lot of free time? Did they spend most of the time in the house, outside the house, romp around the river, or maybe just along those lines?
He wants to know why you think that young people have less trouble down there. Here in the United States, what did we do with leisure time? What did we do with the time to keep us from going the road of so many young people in the U.S.?
As far as the Adventist young people were concerned, I think that there was a much better spiritual life in Venezuela than in the United States. And I think, for instance, I raised up a new church in the eastern part of Venezuela as a result of series of evangelistic meetings. And the young people that we brought in to the church along with the older people, the spirituality was much, they were much more fervent than what we see here in the United States. Today, that church, I think, has almost 1,000 members, don't they, Steve? Huh?
Is that in Paraíso?
Yeah, no, the eastern part of Caracas.
Oh, the East Church?
East Church.
Actually, it has 7 churches that have been born. 7 churches have been born.
Steve says that 7 churches have been born from that one church. And I think, I don't know, the young people here in the United States don't seem to really get that interested in spiritual things as the young people down there do. I still keep in contact with quite a few of those who were young people at one time, but are now adults in Venezuela. I still keep in touch with a number of them. And at General Conference in